Okay, so what better way to learn how to build wealth than to take advice from someone who's built a stupid level of wealth? So we're talking about Warren Buffett in this case, and we're going to look at 10 ways that he mentions that poor people spend money. And we're going to do the opposite of that, so we're not poor? Sounds right. So the first thing he mentions is low value investments. And he's quoted as saying the most important investment you can make is in yourself, and that the knowledge builds up like compound interest. And I like the portion in here where he mentions that your goal should be to go to bed smarter each day. Now, this is something we kind of accidentally implemented here, not knowing that Warren Buffett had said this, but we're really trying to focus on implementing learning new skills. And I actually mentioned that in my last video as a family, learning new skills or just getting a little smarter, every day before you go to bed, the way Buffett mentioned. So I just started my master's degree this week, and trust me, it's a lot. I've been out of school for a while, but it's pushing me, and I enjoy the learning process. The next one is credit card debt, and here he mentions that he pays cash for 98% of the time, so he rarely ever uses a credit card, and if he does, he has one card that he's had, since the beginning of time. Basically, he's an old guy. No offense. But for me, I kind of agree and disagree with this one. I've said in my other videos that I use credit cards pretty heavily, but I do so in a responsible way. I use them, I get the benefits, I get the rewards, I pay them off monthly, I don't get behind, I don't pay interest. I pay them off right away. And I use the bonus money to buy other items or to pay for trips. But I see what he's saying, because if you do fall behind, interest rate on a credit card is notoriously outlandish, and you can get behind very quickly, especially paying 20% interest or whatever the case may be. So if you're not committed, if you're not disciplined to handle credit cards the proper way, I would agree 100% with Buffett, and that's stay away from them. Next up, we have quantity over quality. And here he's saying he won't invest in something just because it's cheap. And he's talking about business here, but we can apply this to everyday life. And this makes me think, this can be a little bit of a challenge to do when you apply it to your life, because I'm, frugal, okay? I'm not cheap. But it is easier to buy the thing that is cheaper price-wise. But part two is you need to make sure that it's still quality, okay? Because if I buy a pair of shoes, for example, that are $10, instead of buying a pair that are $50, but the ones that are $10 are gonna wear out every 6 months, whatever, so I have to keep buying a new pair. Eventually, I'm going to pass that $50 threshold when I could have just bought those in the first place, and maybe those last me a few years. So you kind of got to walk a fine line there and find the best quality you can get for as low a price as possible, and that's what defines a good purchase. Speaking of purchases, unnecessary spending. And here Buffett is talking about he doesn't care about the latest technology, and how he used a $20 flip phone up until like 2020 when he finally got an iPhone. So this one can be a little bit challenging. Generally, I'm really good at this. I don't waste money on frivolous things that I don't need. At the same time, I do love new technology. Like, I do love seeing what new phones come out, what new updates are there, what new TVs, and I like those things. So this is one area where I have to check myself, because I can get caught up in new features and new gadgets on a phone. But typically I do pretty well. New cars, and this is a huge one, because a new car will drop 20% in value within its first year. And this doesn't even talk about the continued depreciation of the vehicle, or the interest you're paying on the loan, or the opportunity cost of investing that money instead of buying that car. And I actually made a whole video about this. I'll put it over here somewhere. But yeah, buying a new car is a terrible, 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 terrible investment. So I do the same thing that Warren talks about here, and that's buying a car that's a couple years old, that's known for reliability, and it's been well maintained, well taken care of. And I still do the necessary checks, have a mechanic come out or whatever, look at the car, make sure it's good to go. And that's the way I purchase a car. When I do purchase a new car, last time I bought a new car was in 2020. Yeah, it was in 2020, end of 2020, because my other car got hit and into a wreck. But again, same thing. It was a couple years old. It was a Mazda 6. Got a really good deal on it. Still driving that car today, fully paid off. paying full price for purchases. And they mentioned here, I think this might be a little too much about him using coupons to pay for McDonald's. That's a lot. But I see what he's saying though, and I'm huge on this one as well. I never pay full price for anything that I buy that's new. And I talked about this as well in a video ago, 1 or 2 videos ago. How I bought a bunch of shoes for my son for Christmas, and they were Jordans because that's what he liked. But I got them all at the Nike outlet, so they were $25 a piece instead of $200 a piece. So you can still find name brand items and really good quality items. You just have to look around a little bit, where it might be out of season. Maybe it's last year's model for clothing or whatever the case may be, or a phone even. I mentioned tech. But if it was, for example, the flagship phone last year compared to the flagship phone this year, and unless something drastically changed with technology, for the most part, you're not going to notice much difference, but you will get a nice big discount on it. So that's usually how I shop. Regular nights out. And this one, I don't know, he says he likes eating the same thing over and over and over, and that he could eat a ham sandwich every day for 50 days in a row for breakfast. I'm not with that one. I can eat certain things over again, but that's a lot for a ham sandwich. And this is actually one of our goals for the year is we want to eat out less because we do quite a bit of that as a family. And one of our goals for 2025 was to learn how to cook and to make more of those meals at home. We're not gonna eat the same thing every day, like he said, but home cooking is gonna save us a lot of money compared to going out. Wasted opportunities. It talks about him delivering newspapers, selling golf balls, and buffing cars, and that he would always look for new opportunities, and when he couldn't find them, he would create them. So create your own business, or something like that. And this one, honestly, I must have been mid-20s when I heard opportunity cost for the first time. And honestly, since I've heard that phrase, it drives me crazy because it almost makes you question all the time. Like, man, what if I would have gone left instead of right, or right instead of left, or if I would have stood still for a second? It can make you bananas. So yeah, try to find good opportunities, try to create good opportunities and take advantage of those. I would love to have my own business one day. That's why my master's right now is an MBA to kind of help me do that down the road. But yeah, I can see what he's saying. It's difficult to always recognize an opportunity. That's probably the hardest part of that. Gambling, and here he's basically just talking about how foolish it is, and how if you have extra money, you shouldn't waste it on gambling. And I've heard people say that they don't invest in the stock market because they consider that gambling. Matter of fact, one of my son's teachers recently told him that probably about a month ago. I don't know how the topic came up in class, but man, when I heard that, I was like, that's couldn't be further from the truth. I guess I could see how you would consider it gambling, but if you look at something like the S&P 500, like it trends up, and it has forever. Yes, there's ebbs and flows and dips along the way, but if you keep your money invested for the long term, you're gonna be successful. So I don't consider that gambling. And the last one he mentions is living beyond your means. And the part that stood out to me here was not to confuse the cost of living with the standard of living. So I like that because you don't have to have a super high cost of living to have a good standard of living. You can live in a modest home and be happy surrounded by loved ones and friends. You can just as easily live in a giant mansion of a high cost of living and be miserable, right? And we see that all the time with celebrities. So the two are not correlated. And that part really stood out to me. So yeah, those are 10 items from our good old Uncle Warren on not to waste your money on and not to be foolish. So I hope it was helpful. I know, it was a little eye-opening to me. Learned a couple things. Hope it was for you as well, and I'll talk to you next week.